The history of Hugo Boss, a timeless brand. The history of Hugo Boss himself and his world-renowned brand is a fascinating and sometimes shocking story. A German designer, Hugo Boss was born in 1885 as the youngest of five children. He served in World War I as a corporal before founding his own clothing company. From Hugo Boss fragrances to men and women's fashion collections, the clothing company is hugely successful, but it had a tumultuous start before eventually achieving the global status we know today. With that in mind, we take a look at the history of a timeless brand that is still popular today. The beginning of Hugo Boss. Born in Metzingen, just south of Stuttgart, Hugo Boss completed an apprenticeship as a merchant before completing military service in the early 1900s. He then worked in a weaving mill before inheriting his parents' lingerie shop in 1908. After serving in World War I, he founded his own clothing company in 1923, which produced the likes of shirts and jackets. At the time, the Third Reich held the power in the country. Due to the economic climate of Germany at the time, Hugo Boss was forced into bankruptcy before reaching an agreement with his creditors to be able to start again. Controversial history. Due to the rise of the Nazi Party in the 1930s, Hugo Boss Company began to produce and sell the uniforms of Nazi soldiers. Boss himself became a member of the Nazi Party in 1931. Unfortunately, because of this, after the war, Hugo Boss was stripped of his right to vote, his right to run a business, and had to pay a hefty fine. The company agreed to participate in a fund to compensate for the use of slave laborers in World War II Germany. The growth of the Boss brand. After Boss' death in 1948, the company was taken over by his son-in-law and his sons. What followed was decades of growth and success, resulting in the Hugo Boss brand we all know today. In 1950, the first men's suits were designed and produced, setting the tone for the style and direction of the brand. Soon after, in 1954, Boss fragrances were successfully introduced. The eponymous brand began to acquire a number of licenses and partnerships, as well as realizing numerous collections. The Hugo Boss name became a brand in 1970 and was registered as an international trademark by 1977. The brand was split into different labels to denote various parts of the business. This included Hugo and Boss. Boss was then split further into Boss Orange, producing casual wear, Boss Green, producing golf clothing and sportswear, Boss Selection, producing a luxury range from 2017, Boss Orange and Green were integrated under the core Boss brand, forming a two-brand strategy. This Hugo Boss brand branched out quickly, acquiring licenses for eyewear in 1989, footwear in 1995, and watches in 1996. Evolving with the times, the Hugo Boss brand ensured it moved forward with the rest of the world, innovating its offering and positioning itself a positive space within society. In 1996, the brand introduced the Hugo Boss Prize, which was designed to identify and honor contemporary artists through a partnership with the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum and Foundation. Furthermore, Hugo Boss also partnered with UNICEF in 2007. In 2009, a mobile app became available, and in 2011, the brand's online store was relaunched in Mandarin in order to branch out into the Chinese market. Recently, Hugo Boss became the first global apparel partner to support the Formula E race series. Top 10 intriguing facts about Hugo Boss. 1. Hugo Boss was born in Germany. Boss was the youngest of 5 children born to Louis and Heinrich Boss in Mexican Kingdom of Württemberg. He trained as a merchant, served in the army from 1903 to 1905, and then worked in a weaving mill in Constance. In 1908, he inherited his parents' lingerie shop in Metzingen. He was drafted into the army in 1914 and served until the end of World War I as a corporal. Second, Hugo Boss began by producing functional suits for factory workers. Hugo Boss, a German tailor, established his workshop in Metzingen, a small village south of Stuttgart, in 1924, which is still the group's headquarters today. He began making protective suits for industrial workers as well as men's work clothes. In the 1930s, he successfully converted his workshop into a small factory. Later came the dark era of Hugo Boss, which included his involvement in Nazi regime business, selling uniforms, and the use of slave laborers in his factory during World War II. Number 3. He utilized slaves from the Balkan states. Historians note that Boss used the work of approximately 40 prisoners and approximately 150 slaves from the Baltic states, Belgium, France, Austria, Poland, and the USSR to meet the demands for uniforms in the final years of the war. According to the same sources, the company's directors were enamored with Nazism, and Hugo Boss had a photograph of himself with Hitler in his apartment in 1945. 4. Hugo Boss apologized for his mistreating laborers. Hugo Boss, the German fashion house, apologized for its treatment of forced laborers during World War II, when it supplied uniforms to the Nazis. The apology was issued to coincide with the publication of a new history of the company during the Hitler years, which it had commissioned. Its factory employed 140 forced Polish and 40 French workers. 5. Hugo Boss began his career as a merchant's apprentice. He was interested in starting his own business. Boss began his career as a merchant before joining the army during World War I. Hugo Boss founded his clothing company in Metzingen, a small town south of Stuttgart, Germany. In 1924, Boss established a clothing factory with the help of 2 other manufacturers. Originally employing around 30 people, the company made handmade garments. Rudolf Born, a textile distributor who supplied clothing to the National Socialist Party, was the company's first major commission. Boss advertised his company as a supplier of party equipment since 1924, during the 1930s. 6. Boss had to declare bankruptcy in 1931. Due to Germany's economic difficulties, Boss was forced to declare bankruptcy in 1931. He did, however, reach an agreement with his creditors, which left him with 6 sewing machines to restart his business. The following year, Boss joined the Nazi Party and began producing uniforms for the SS and the Hitler Youth, among others. He stated that he hoped the party would end the devastating unemployment that was ravaging Germany at the time, and that he had become estranged from the Lutheran Church. He became a sponsoring member of the SS as well as member of the Nazi Party. 7. He became a member of the Nazi Party. In his book, Hugo Boss 1924 to 1945, Roman Koster, an economic historian at the Bunchen University in Munich, wrote, "It is clear that Hugo F. Boss joined the party not only because it led to contracts for uniform production, but also because he was a follower of National Socialism." By the third quarter of 1932, SS Oberfuhrer Professor Karl Diebstich and graphic designer Walter Heck, who had no affiliation with the company, had designed the all-black SS uniform to replace the SA brown shirts. The Hugo Boss company produced this black uniform as well as the brown SA shirts, and Hitler used black and brown uniforms. Some of the workers were French and Polish POWs forced to work. In 1999, US lawyers acting on behalf of Holocaust survivors filed a lawsuit against Hugo Boss for using slave labor during the war. 8. Hugo Boss was elected to the German Labor Upfront. Hugo gradually rose through the Nazi Party's ranks, eventually becoming a member of the German Labor Front, a national labor organization that managed to supplant all of the existing trade unions at the time. But Hugo Boss' association with the Nazi Party paid off when he ran an ad in 1934 claiming that his clothing company had been the sole supplier of Nazi uniform for the previous 10 years. However, this was not entirely accurate, as he had only begun producing these in 1928 at the most. 9. Hugo was convicted of being an activist. However, as history has shown, this association would eventually end in another major disappointment when the Nazis finally lost the war in 1945. Hugo was convicted of being an activist and beneficiary of National Socialism in a post-war trial in 1946, and he was stripped of his voting rights and barred from running a business in Germany. He was also hit with the £54,000 fine. However, Boss appealed the verdict, claiming in court that he was only a follower of National Socialism rather than an activist, and that saving his company and doing something about Germany's rampant economic decline at the time were the driving factors in his decision to align with Nazis. 10. Hugo Boss died from an untreatable infection. Hugo Boss would die shortly after the war, on the 9th of August 1948, at the age of 63 from an untreatable infection that caused a tooth abscess.